Great. Well, good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Hannah Delmet, Senior Director of Partnership Development here at Concordia. And if this is your first Concordia event or if you're a regular, you know we like to start on time. So we're going to get started on today's discussion with Acting Administrator John Barsa of the U.S. Agency for International Development. Before we get started and turn over with some true welcome remarks from co-founder and CEO Matthew Swift, I'll just give some quick Zoom housekeeping rules. We're all experts by now due to COVID-19, but all the same, if you're new to this platform, there are opportunities to engage through the chat and the Q&A feature. We invite you to use both. If you do have a question that you'd like us to address later in this discussion, please use the Q&A feature. It helps us keep track of things. As I mentioned in the moments before we started, the chat feature is a great space for you to react to comments, to share your own work, and to introduce yourself so that we can continue to build on this community, even though we're not in the same room. We'll be starting first with some opening remarks from Matt, as I mentioned, going into some overview from the acting administrator, and then into a quick interview by myself and the acting administrator. Then we'll go into Q&A, which is a great time for you to share your own work or to ask your own questions specific to the discussion at hand, which is of course how USAID is operating in COVID-19 and how partnerships have been integral to the successes it's still managing to issue out as an organization. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt. Matt, kick us off.
Thank you very, very much, Hannah, and thank you all for joining us here at Concordia this afternoon. It is my privilege to be joined today by Acting Administrator John Barsa of USAID. Prior to his current role, he served as the Acting Assistant Secretary and later as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security Office of Partnership and Engagement in the Department of Homeland Security, of course, an office that has a special place within Concordia. One of his many successes in this role was his leadership in the Office of Partnership and Engagement's Blue campaign in combating human trafficking. Administrator Barsa was also previously appointed during the administration of President George W. Bush to lead senior level coordination with the private sector and support legislative affairs efforts for NASA. Administrator Barsa is also a former member of the U.S. Army Reserves, in which he served with the 11th Special Forces Group and later with the 450th Civil Affairs Battalion. In his role at the Department of Homeland Security, Acting Administrator Barsa demonstrated great leadership when he was deployed to South Florida and Puerto Rico to assist in the responses to Hurricane Irma and Maria, respectively. Acting Administrator Barsa also continues to be a great leader in his role at USAID and assisting those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's our pleasure to welcome him here today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Acting Administrator.
Matt, thank you so much for the kind words and the kind introduction. Yeah, listening to all the things I've done, it's like, yeah, now I understand what my family says. I can't seem to keep a job, can I? So, again, well, thanks for the kind introduction. Hannah, thank you as well. Thank you both for inviting me to speak to you today. I've always admired Concordia's work to solve global problems collaboratively. You've asked me to talk about America's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm happy to share what we've been doing. So throughout history, when the planet has faced crisis, America has always been a beacon of hope, acting boldly to save lives and sustain and strengthen a free and peaceful and prosperous world. Foreign assistance programs like the Marshall Plan, Peace Corps, Millennium Challenge Corporation, and the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, as we all know, the President's Malaria Initiative, and USAID, we've pulled millions from the depths of poverty, disease, suffering, and we've really offered a chance to believe in the promise of a better life for so many. When it comes to our generosity in protecting the health of communities across the globe, America cannot be matched. For more than half a century, the United States and the American people have always answered the call to protect the world's health security, leading the way as the world's largest provider of health assistance. We've contributed more than $140 billion in global health assistance in the 21st century alone. Over the past 20 years, USAID's support has helped Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, vaccinate more than 760 million children, preventing 13 million deaths. This month, we committed $1.16 billion to Gavi over the next 4 years, with the goal to immunize 300 million additional children by 2025. The U.S. President's Malaria Initiative, or PMI, has saved more than 7 million lives and prevented more than 1 billion malaria cases worldwide since 2000. The United States has invested more than 85 billion to fight HIV/AIDS through PEPFAR, the largest commitment by any nation to address a single disease in history, and hundreds of millions more to fight other diseases like Ebola, malaria, and tuberculosis all around the world. PEPFAR has saved millions of lives in Africa. America's investments in global health throughout the decades have allowed partner countries to build capacity and strengthen health systems and democratic institutions, enabling them to better respond to global health crises. Today, faced with COVID-19, one of the most significant global health crises in recent memory, the United States is again acting boldly and demonstrating clear and decisive leadership. Teams across our government, including USAID, the world's premier development agency, are working together as part of an all-of-America response. This response will support health systems, humanitarian assistance, economic security, and stabilization efforts worldwide with $2.4 billion in emergency supplemental funding allocated by Congress. Since the onset of the outbreak, USAID and the State Department alone have committed more than $1 billion in assistance specifically aimed at fighting the pandemic abroad. This funding will save lives by improving public health education, protecting healthcare workers, strengthening laboratory systems, and increasing disease surveillance with rapid response capacity in more than 120 countries. For example, we're providing $23 million to procure ventilators for key partners and allies. In addition to funding, USAID is offering a wealth of expertise to help governments better manage public health emergencies. We're providing high quality, transparent, and meaningful assistance to support countries affected by COVID-19 and equip local communities with the tools needed to stop the spread of the virus. And these numbers don't reflect the generosity of private businesses, nonprofit groups, charities, faith-based organizations, and individuals, as well as the ingenuity of our scientists, researchers, and innovators. Together, these businesses and organizations have provided $4 billion in donations and assistance to combat COVID-19, accounting for nearly 80% of global philanthropic efforts. Our All of America response is the right response. Adding the power of private enterprise and individual ingenuity to governmental efforts is the surest pathway to sustainable development. All around the world, we're tapping into the innovation of private businesses to implement creative, market-based solutions to development challenges. To make it easier for innovators to contribute to solutions, we've partnered with the Global Innovation Exchange to develop a COVID-19 website to provide a clearinghouse of innovations that can be applied to the response, as well as COVID-19 related funding opportunities. COVID-19 will continue to have an extraordinary impact on our own lives and work, and on those of our partners and beneficiaries in the months and years to come. In addition, it is altering countries' progress on their journeys to self-reliance. We remain committed to helping partner countries throughout this pandemic and its second and third order effects as well. To make sure USAID is positioned to successfully execute its mission in the post-COVID world in a way that is flexible and agile, I've established a temporary agency planning cell and executive steering committee to guide this effort. While the COVID-19 task force manages near-term challenges arising from this pandemic, the agency must prepare for lasting changes to the developmental and humanitarian landscape in the medium and to long term. The agency planning cell will perform research, conduct outreach, and prepare analysis around key strategic questions. It will then provide this information to the executive steering committee, composed of senior leaders from across the agency, who will craft recommendations for my consideration. No other nation can match our unparalleled generosity, our open collaborative approach, or our long-term commitment to helping countries on their journeys to self-reliance. We are about saving lives and not saving face. Which brings me to China. As Secretary Pompeo said recently, we greatly underestimated the degree to which Beijing is ideologically and politically hostile to free nations. The whole world is now waking up to that fact. Ironically, the Chinese Communist Party's response to the COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan has accelerated this new appreciation. According to the Chinese government's own accounts, the COVID-19 outbreak began in Wuhan, Hubei province, China, in December 2019 or earlier. Chinese Communist Party officials in Wuhan and Beijing had a special responsibility to inform the Chinese people and the world of the threat, since they were the first to learn of it. Instead, the People's Republic of China's government hid news from the virus from its own people for weeks, while suppressing information and punishing doctors and journalists who raised the alarm. It denied that human-to-human transmission was happening and pressured others to repeat this falsehood. These actions allowed the virus to spread globally during this critical period. By the way, the PRC's behavior is unsurprising. China's authoritarian system is built on censorship, and throughout its history, the party has demonstrated it cares more about maintaining its power and rigid ideology than alleviating its own people's suffering. The United States values deeply our relationship with the Chinese people and will continue to support them against this repressive regime. General Secretary Xi continues to claim that China has acted with openness, transparency, and responsibility. That's absurd. It's been 164 days since doctors at Wuhan Central's hospital first started sharing information about a SARS-like virus. Yet Beijing continues to deny investigators access to relevant facilities, destroy live virus samples, and censor discussion of this pandemic within China. It is important to remember that COVID-19 is an ongoing pandemic, and by still refusing to give us what we need to fight it, Beijing is jeopardizing more lives in the future by continuing to not cooperate with the world. China's contribution to fighting the pandemic are paltry compared to the cost that they've imposed on the world. Hundreds and thousands of lives lost, millions of jobs and economies crippled. The bulk of the People's Republic of China's COVID-19 related assistance has been in the form of photo ops and faulty personal protection equipment. The reality is, the foreign assistance programs of Chinese Communist Party has nothing to do with development and everything to do with intimidation, influence, resources, and power. China is focused on diverting attention from initial COVID-19 mismanagement and causing chaos and confusion throughout the conflicting conspiracy theories. They're also waging a propaganda disinformation campaign to try to deflect responsibility for the pandemic to others. While Beijing is quick to take credit for donations and sales by its private companies, it quickly distances itself when things go wrong. And things are going wrong. At least 45 countries around the world have expressed concern about faulty Chinese PPEs or tests. The Trump administration will continue to push China to provide high-quality supplies and to donate to recognize incredible mechanisms for humanitarian and global health assistance, rather than using assistance as a means of propaganda and political bribery. And the United States will continue to lead the world in health and humanitarian aid in our All of America effort. We account for more than 40% of total global health funding. China must be held accountable, or the Chinese people in the world won't be safe the next time a dangerous pathogen originates in China. Saving lives is more important than saving face. America and USAID will continue to provide a different model, one of generous action, public transparency, good governance, coalition building, and sharing information. We know that this approach is the best strategic investment we can make for America's health, safety, and security, because we know that in our increasingly interconnected world, an infectious disease threat anywhere is a threat everywhere. We know that diseases do not respect national borders, and that strengthening health systems overseas will protect American lives here at home. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you. I believe you have some questions, and I'm happy to answer your questions and engage in dialogue. Thank you so very much.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for providing a very comprehensive overview of the great work USAID has done, particularly in the global health space. Before we get to today's discussion, which is, of course, oriented around how partnerships by the agency and with the support of the agency are leading to a more robust global COVID-19 response, I want to start with one of my favorite get to know you questions. You're new in this role. This is the first time you're speaking to Concordia, so let's just take a moment to get to know you. I have to ask, with USAID operating in over 100 countries, you mentioned 120, is there a mission that you're so excited to go visit once emergency travel is lifted and we're able to normalize some of the routine visits? Who's doing something really innovative that you just want to see on the ground?
Well, thank you so much. So I've been about 2 months in this current position as the acting administrator. Before that, I was the Senate confirmed head of the Latin American Caribbean Bureau. So in my time at LACS, I remember my first trip to the Latin American Caribbean Bureau, I was fully cognizant of the strategic relationship we had with Colombia. So my first trip heading up the Latin American Caribbean Bureau was to Colombia because of that special partnership we have there and their strategic role we had. But I was able to combine that with a trip to Ecuador because we are reestablishing a presence in Ecuador. So that was very important to me to help go out there. So I was able to participate in some dialogue with the Ecuadorian government to talk about and define how USAID was going to come back into Ecuador, reestablish a mission, get those priorities. So so that was my first trip in the LAC Bureau. I ended up going to Haiti a couple of times because Haiti has some challenges. So I wanted to make sure I was making sure I understood the challenges on the ground and I was able to provide the mission with the resources and top cover for what they will. Because when I say top cover, it is not just approval for activities, but the ability to be an advocate for resources and help out. So I'm coming in with that same mind frame right now. So when you ask, what is your priority? Where would you like to go? It's almost like being asked to pick what your favorite child is, because there's so many things going on. So I cannot tell you how proud I am to be leading USAID. This is the most talented workforce. The people of the United States of America are the most generous people in the history of the planet. And having USAID as the premier development agency, we do so much work, so much fantastic, incredible, and unheralded work around the world. So I want to go everywhere at one time. That's not feasible. So one of the things I'm looking to do, we're operationalizing a new Conflict Prevention and Stabilization Bureau.
Great.
It is putting together different ongoing activities into one bureau. So as having as my job being an advocate for our budgets and our workforce, that I want to see some of the work they're doing, because it's one of the newest bureaus. It has needs for resources. So to better advocate for them, maybe going to Mozambique or some other countries to see some of this work in place. But again, I want to go everywhere, but I can't, at least not on the first trip. I will be traveling a lot. I look forward to the travel restrictions going away.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, I'm sure all of your amazing team members around the world take no slight in any of the answers. With my background being from USIP, I'm so glad to hear about this new bureau you're launching. And of course, that ties into your experiences with Colombia, which is doing, the USAID team down there is doing some really transformational work when it comes to the peace process. So great. Then moving directly into this discussion and the COVID-19 response, in your opening remarks, you shared some of your strategies. So that's great, but I'd love to hear how you're prioritizing where money is allocated and how you determine the most effective partners to be working with right now, especially in this time where we're working not only with urgency, but also the need for resiliency and prevention measures, which is a tightrope that USAID, in my opinion, walks quite nicely. But how is COVID-19 shaping some of that strategic thinking?
Well, part of it, I mean, we're playing catch up initially because of the lack of information sharing from China. We came at this a little late. So by the time we had the supplementals able to come in, the first tranche of funding, we went to Asia Pacific countries, which had close economic and ties to China, and specific countries in Africa because of existing transportation corridors were most likely. So that was our first tranche of money to try to get it there. And then by the time our next tranche of money came up, the footprint of the pandemic had expanded. So we tried to, again, we were trying to get ahead of it. So we expanded our footprint more. By the time our third and subsequent tranches of money, it's already global. So then the decision to make how to allocate resources, we're trying to do it in a data-driven fashion. So because we have the existing people in the field, wherever you are in government, you never have enough money. So clearly, I mean,
but do you have enough data? Do you have enough data? I know that's such a challenge, and you mentioned it in your remarks as well in terms of transparency and information sharing and reticences from certain governments. And so do you feel you have the data necessary?
Well, you probably never have enough data too, but because of the work we do, because of the existing footprint we have on PMI and PEPFAR, we have a footprint in the countries we operate. So we were uniquely positioned to able to quickly assess capability and capacity of different healthcare systems. So one of the things we're able to do is to tailor our response for the needs of that particular country. Because we have the existing footprint, we're able to see, okay, for battling COVID in country X, we think access to clean water is a priority. So we're able to tailor our response based on each country's needs. So you can't say this one cookie cutter approach, because when you're battling the pandemic, it's not just PPE. There's so many elements to fighting the pandemic. So one of the things we're able to do, because of the work we've been doing for decades in global health, we're able to tailor these solutions to different countries. And it, it is a worldwide challenge, and you have to make Solomonic decisions every day in terms of how to best allocate resources. Yeah.
Great. I'm glad to hear you mention WASH. That's a big priority area. And just last week, we held a webinar with one of your partner agencies, Millennium Challenge Corporation, about the great work in water, sanitation, and hygiene, because that is a key area, and we just want to keep repeating that. WASH is essential to this solution. In thinking through how you're evolving your strategy and working on the ground, and not only responding to COVID-19 related needs, but also the other good work that you do in all the myriad of ways USAID is active, are your partnerships being approached differently? Do you feel like your on the ground teams or the existing partnerships are evolving or shaping in any way? And can you share any information on that?
So it's almost serendipity or chance or fate, however, that we had started under Mark Green's leadership, we started a new partnership initiative, and we had piloted in a few different places. So it got to the point that the period for the pilot was ending. We had learned some things from our pilot program. So we just started a new partnership initiative just when the pandemic just started to hit. So it was almost kind of serendipity. So what we were doing in the pilot program was finding innovative ways to increase our base, or the people we work with, to make it easier for our missions to work with a different set of organizations, stakeholders, groups that are local to the country in hand. So that was, again, serendipity. So we put out that guidance about working with other stakeholders, other groups. So that was good. What this pandemic has done, it has forced us to innovate in a quicker fashion and take on some risks. So this has manifested itself in a number of ways. So like many government agencies, we have had differing levels of experience with telework, for example. So what the pandemic has caused us to do, because the United States government and USAID cannot retreat from the world stage in any way, shape, or form, in any place we have to do things differently in order to maintain operations and to keep our programs going, not just healthcare, but all of our programs. So we've had to look for more aggressive ways to empower Foreign Service nationals, for example, more aggressive in terms of telework. And yes, working with partners differently and empowering them to do the role. So and I'm extremely proud of our workforce. I have to say, we have risen to the challenge. I'm amazed by the talented people working at USAID and all members of the USAID families, and includes contractors, partners, because we're all in this together. It's not just people drawing a government paycheck. It's everybody. It is a USAID family, and I'm really proud of the work we've all collectively done to meet the challenges.
Definitely, kudos to the team. You mentioned the pilot program, and I think this aligns a bit with the strategy for the journey to self-reliance. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Can we speak a little bit about that journey to self-reliance and how that's opened up new partnerships with the private sector, or how, with the already committed $1 billion to the COVID-19 response that USAID's championed, how is that catalyzing private sector involvement in today's pandemic response?
So, and again, I salute Mark Green every day, and certainly under his leadership, the journey to self-reliance, with multiple defined objective metrics to measure a country's progression along this journey to self-reliance, has been an incredible intellectual framework, because it enables us, by having key defined metrics, it better enables us to seek partners for defined goals and tasks. So being able to see where exactly the private sector can help. That journey to self-reliance with accompanying metrics has led to better decision making across the board. So just as the journey to self-reliance and accompanying metrics measured a country's progress, I'm afraid to say that we're also going to be using the same intellectual framework and metrics to measure regression. Our concern has always been about this pandemic's effect on fragile democracies, economies, and societies. We look at here in the United States. I mean, look at what it's doing to our economy. Our economy is the strongest economy, most resilient economy in the world. And we're taking some body blows. So what is this going to do for fragile economies? So the secondary, tertiary effects of the pandemic are going to be with us for a long time. It's more than just a healthcare crisis. One of the analogies I took from one of my staff was to think of the pandemic the way you see a lightning strike. You see lightning, but you don't hear the thunder for a couple of seconds afterwards. So on the face of it, it's a healthcare crisis. But again, as economies contract, then is this going to lead to displaced populations, increased vulnerabilities to food insecurity? So the journey of self-reliance and the metrics helps us measure on any number of levels where individual needs are and can better inform our decision to engage the private sector and other entities to address the particular challenges of the country.
Great, thank you. In a moment, we'll be turning to questions from our audience. If you've not yet used the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your question, please do so. We'd love to get to those. So I'll take one final interviewer question. We have some amazing partnering entities on today's call, many of which who have partnered with USAID in the past or are hoping to do so. Should current recipients of USAID funding be worried about the sustainability of that funding in the near future, knowing all the ripple effects and ramifications you just unpacked there for us? Can you assure us?
No, the funding's not going to go away. No. So as I mentioned before, my concerns about the secondary, tertiary effects of this pandemic are real. I have, as I mentioned in my comments, I set up a task force to deal with over-the-horizon challenges to better inform decision making. So we're not going to prejudice outcomes, but we're looking at the long-term challenges. The post-pandemic world is going to be different from the pre-pandemic world with a variety of challenges. So the study, this over-the-horizon study, is going to look at the needs and how USAID can rise through the challenges, and it's going to inform decision-making conversations within the executive branch on resources. But yeah, so existing partners, USAID is not going away. We'll be here for a while. We still look forward to be working with you for years and decades to come. So we're not going away. Put those fears aside.
Great.
Okay, collect aside from everybody. Okay.
Yeah. So submit your proposals.